to bear in mind too that between then and that time there were several other attempts on my life. People,
15
total of 15 attempts. And realistically, some of them could have been legitimate accidents, but at this point I choose not to think that because there were just too many of them.
Welcome back. I'm your boy Bear Jags, and thanks for following along with my journey. As the UFO community continues to search for answers daily, we're constantly looking for the newest, freshest sightings, scouring the internet, searching Google, calling our friends, looking into the sky, everything. But together today, we're going to rewind the clock back into the 70s, the Vietnam War era, to the original Whistleblower, long before Jeremy Corbell's, long before Jacob Barber's, long before MUFON. This is the beginning. Together, we're going to listen to this very rare interview of William English, a retired military secret special ops veteran, was entrusted by the government to overlook secure and secret documents and to recover and photograph paranormal activity beyond our own understanding.
My clearance at the time was what they call a Crypto 14. I don't think the American public realizes just how limited the president's powers really are. But he's not really doing the job of government. You've got your agencies like the CIA, the DIA, MSI, the Labor Department, and all those things that are doing the real work of the matter. And realistically, all the president really is a figurehead. Now, you got to bear in mind, too, that President Reagan was in his second term of office when he started his alien speeches.
What we're going to learn together today is the enactment of Project Blue Book, where the government began to take files and reports. You see, nobody really knows the exact date when Project Blue Book began, but we do know that it's been added to and mandated multiple times, which gives us so many questions. Does the government really know what's going on? Are they absolutely hiding from us truth and secrets that we all should be entitled to? Let's listen in and hear what William English has to say.
I left Vietnam in 1971 after a 2-year tour of duty there, and was sent to Germany and all. And by this time I had married, and my wife at that point was a school. So we took a transfer to England, where she was assigned to the dependent schools at RAF Chicksands, which is an Air Force Security Services command base, a big air listening base. And I guess we'd been at Chicksands for a month, and I was at the officers club one day, and I happened to meet an old commanding officer of mine from my Army days. He had retired from the Army several years before with the government, and I said, sure, I'd love to. And so he set it up with the interviews and everything, and I got hired by Air Force Security Services Command as a data analyst. And I was assigned to the analysis section of Air Force Security Services Command at Chicksands, and my job essentially was to analyze information and material that came through the Big Ear site. And I worked at it for close to 3 years before I came into my office one day and was asked to analyze a document called Grudge Blue Book Report number 13.
Okay, let me stop you right there. This is July 1977.
July 27th, 1977.
This is the day that the alleged Grudge Blue Book Project Special Report 13 crossed your desk. Let me straighten out on that one point.
Mm-hmm.
There's some contention as to whether it was Grudge or Blue Book that was responsible for this particular special report. Was it Grudge or Blue Book? Help me out on that.
I believe it was Blue Book, but I believe it was a mistake on their part. Mm-hmm. The document was entitled Grudge/Blue Book Report 13. Now, The government, for close to 40 years, has denied the existence of Blue Book Report 13. Again, I don't believe that. What I think happened is, based on information that I've been able to get a hold of through the years and through comments from other people who've been involved in investigating UFOs, is that at that point they figured that report number 12 would be the last report they ever issued. And somewhere along the line they made a mistake, and they decided that they needed to produce a report that filled in a certain level of government official on what was really happening. And they entitled it, quite by accident, Blue Book Report 13. And when they realized the mistake that they had made, they jerked it out of the channels immediately, retitled it to Grudge Blue Book 13 because it had Grudge material in it from way back in Project Grudge days before Blue Book had been renamed.
Wow. Obviously, William English used his military credentials to receive this job, giving himself a better rank, giving him access to what we're hearing now, top secret documents. This man was not pushing himself to the forefront of the UFO scene. He was kind of laying low, but he held compelling information and outstanding documents. We must understand that this is one of the first whistleblowers known to come to the forefront. His credentials speak for themselves. He held mind-blowing information and had access to documents that we all wish we could see. Let's continue to listen in and hear what he has to say.
I've started UFONet. I've become involved very publicly in the UFO research and investigations. UFONet is an anachronism for UFO Information Network. And the whole idea behind UFONet was to be able to open a place or create a situation where there could be a repository of information from all individuals and organizations that deal in UFOs, and make that information available to all organizations. But to be able to essentially provide a place for legitimate investigators and organizations to come to and find information they needed that might possibly fill in a gap on a case that they're investigating, or for them to provide information that will help another investigator fill in a gap for a case that he or she might be investigating.
We're obviously learning real quick that he had access to classified information, giving him reasons to obviously want to expand and to see further and go deeper into the rabbit hole of ufology. Let's listen in and hear what Bill has to say.
Okay, now flash forward a little bit to where they start to try to get you.
All of a sudden I started having some pretty weird experiences. I jumped on the back of my motorcycle and was cruising down to Sierra Vista. Anyway, what happened was that I was cruising down Interstate 10, and there was a black car that was like a limousine. And I would call it a Lincoln Town car because that's what it looked like, but it started pacing me through the traffic. When I slowed down, it slowed down. When I sped up, it sped up, and it kept pretty equal distance the whole way. And we hit a stretch of road where there was no oncoming traffic, and he started speeding up. And I happened to see it happen to the back of my rearview mirror. I sort of instinctively pulled as far to the right as I possibly could, thinking this individual would pass me. Well, as I pulled over, it pulled over. It kept me in a direct line right between its headlights. And it occurred to me that something wasn't right here. So it accelerated, it came up after me, and just as it was about maybe 10 or 15 yards away from me, I swerved to the left, and it came shooting right by me where I would have been. So went on down the road. He goes shooting on by me, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, well, okay, he's going to keep going. All of a sudden, he slammed on the brakes, did a 180, swung that thing around, and started coming back at me again. At this point, it occurred to me that they were kind of serious about this. So I cut off into the desert, and they tried to follow me into the desert, and they got about 20 or 30 yards into the desert before the car started to bog down in the soft dirt. And I stayed in the desert all the way towards Sierra Vista. I just sort of cut a diagonal path toward the Sierra Vista and wound up coming out on the road toward Huachuca City.
Wow. Unbelievable. The more you know, the more dangerous you are. That's what I'm gathering from this here. Hearing him talk about how they want him dead, or possibly make him believe that they want him dead. This is only proof to me that Bill was involving himself in some top secret things that maybe he shouldn't or wished he didn't get involved with. Wow. Let's continue listening in and hear what Bill has to say. Keep it going.
All right, let's get back to this document you allegedly saw. Now, it was your job to open up this document, take a look at it, analyze it, and evaluate it as far as credibility. What basically did it contain? What met your eyes when you opened it?
The report itself contained several items. Most notably were a series of photographs, several dozen photographs of things like autopsy reports on alien bodies, photographs of the alien bodies, photographs of technology, recovered disc, and this kind of thing, and tons and tons and tons of technical reports. And I read it through very carefully, and I thought that this was a joke. I really did think it was a joke until I got to the section of photographs, which I recognized. Those were the photographs of the mutilated bodies in the B-52 that we recovered in Vietnam. I recognized those photographs because I took them. And in the report, it said, essentially, the story behind it is that the last transmission from the aircraft stated that they were under attack from a bright light. And this apparently was repeated 2 or 3 times, and then all communication with the aircraft broke off.
And this is the first you knew that the incident that you had investigated was connected to UFOs.
Right. This was the very first thing, very first time I realized what was going on. And then I started rereading everything, looking at the photographs. I had some photographic experience. I tried to see if they were tricks. I looked at the photographs under a magnifying glass, realizing that there was a possibility that these things could have been manufactured in a good special effects lab. But I saw no sign of it, and based on the other material that I saw in it, and based on those photographs that I saw, I eventually decided that there was a very high probability that the material was true. And at that point, I assigned to it a 98% probability rating of being accurate information. Well, I had possession of the documents for about 10 hours.
10 hours.
But I was in a controlled environment, too. You have to realize is that when you're in a situation like that, where you're looking at secure documents, you're locked into your cubbyhole. There's essentially a guard on where you're at. And there was also a report from Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And that report essentially said, and Hynek's words at the time was that although he had not seen the evidence firsthand, based on what he read, he believed that this was true evidence. Mm-hmm. And based on the material he had seen. And Hynek, unbeknown to me, had been flown out from Illinois at that time and asked to act as an advisor or a speaker on it. Hynek and I were in the green room, and I flat out asked him, I said, what about the report 13? Well, Hynek said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, look, I've seen the report. I saw the report that you wrote and was included in it. And he looked at me and he said, well, I said, well, what gives? And I started to get very angry about it. And he said, look, don't try and involve me in any of your bullshit. Simple fact of the matter is that to this day, I will deny any knowledge of Report 13. And I said, how can you do that? And I'll never forget this as long as I live. He said, who are they going to believe? Me or some shaved-tail who's been at this for less than a year and who everybody thinks is lying anyway? But you have to bear in mind that Hynek, when Blue Book ended, he issued a statement that said that there were no such things as UFOs or any of this kind of stuff. And then when he was free of government service, did a complete turnaround and started the International Center for UFO Studies.
Unbelievable. Now he had access to these reports. We're all listening in and hearing what he has to say. He's seen aliens, entities, bodies. This is bonkers. We are starting to understand where he's coming from. Right now, he has me on the edge of my seat. It seems very peculiar that he would not want to expose this and bring this to light, almost, in my opinion. But then again, it is top secret. He has a job to uphold and a responsibility. But sometimes, certain information you hear, you cannot keep to yourself. And that's what I think we're hearing here right now. A man that is so compelled with overwhelming information that he just can't keep it to himself. It's not even worth keeping it to himself. The world needs to know. That's what I'm gathering. What do you think he's doing? Tell me in the comments below. I think we'd all like to know. Let's keep it rolling. Let's hear what Bill has to say next.
Maybe go back to the B-52 incident. Okay, now you were in Special Forces Vietnam.
I was in Special Forces Vietnam. I was part of the 8th Special Forces unit that was attached to 5th Special Forces Special Operations in Vietnam.
Okay. Along comes an incident where you are dispatched to the site of a B-52 crash, or some kind of a landing involving a B-52.
Well, initially we were told that we had to go into the jungle to recover a downed aircraft, which was pretty standard. The aircraft had crashed in Laos. At the time, we weren't really aware of what the circumstances were, other than the fact it had been downed. It wasn't until several years later that I discovered what the details were concerning the B-52 and how it came to be in the jungle. But we received our orders from MACV headquarters in Saigon, which essentially said go in, recover flight recorders, any survivors if there were any, and bring them back out. So we crossed over into the border of Laos, and it took us about 3 or 4 days to get there, and we found the aircraft at the coordinates which had been given us. Apparently they had been able to pinpoint its location by its locator beacon. And when we got there, initially what we found was pretty unusual, and we didn't really give it much credence or thought at that point until we started looking around. And what we found was the B-52 was completely intact. There was no visible damage. There was no cut through the jungle that looked any of that kind of stuff. And the only damage that we saw to the aircraft was where the aircraft was sitting on the underside of the fuselage, and that was from the pressure of the aircraft sitting there. The aircraft had a full load of bombs, a full load of fuel in it. And we took a very big chance in blowing one of the hatches open. And when we went into the aircraft, what we discovered was the crew, the entire crew, were still in their safety seats, still in their harnesses, and they were all dead.
Mutilated how?
We didn't know it at the time, but they were mutilated in what we now refer to as the classic sense of the word. Eyes were missing. Sections of their faces were skinned completely away, and the bone was cleaned like white. It was white bone, teeth, sections of the neck and throat all the way down to the esophagus. Their tongues had been removed.
So basically reminiscent of the
cattle mutilations, right. And there was no blood. And usually in a situation like that, you would expect to see blood all over the place. And in confined quarters like that, you would expect to be slipping and sliding in it. Well, we weren't any. The very fact that there wasn't any was remarkable to us. So after we spent about an hour looking through the ship, collecting dog tags and taking photographs of everything. We pulled the flight recorder out of the aircraft, and we sealed the plane and filled it with explosive charges.
Whoa. This is where everything would change for me personally. We're listening in how he was a hands-on encounter on one of his recon missions of an entity seen that he can't explain. I couldn't even imagine. This is deep. Now I see where the fire comes from. He has a black hole of curiosity that has to be answered. And back then, I can only imagine. This is so long ago. These guys didn't have no internet. They didn't have anything besides encyclopedias and a telephone. It must have been so complicated to transfer information and to receive data. It must have been so hard to be able to even come out and do this in the attempt to tell the truth. This is very scary at this time. I mean, you're so isolated in such a smaller community because, you know, I just said it. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have access to 1 billion people instantly at the snap of a finger. Absolutely crazy. His team obviously blew up the aircraft. And I did do a little research to see if there was any witnesses to this. And unfortunately, all of his comrades on his platoon and his team all passed away in Vietnam. Bill was the only one who was lucky enough to survive. Let's listen in and hear what he has to say next. Keep it going, Bill.
I don't remember it as well now as I did then, but I do remember the pertinent facts about it.
When was this dictated? I mean, this came from some notes that you dictated into a cassette recorder, I guess.
Because they were dictated into a cassette recorder.
You did it from memory.
Basically from memory. I returned to the United States the first week of June, and first week of August. And the date I actually viewed the document was June the 27th, not July the 27th, and I was back in the States about the middle of July. Okay. And August, September, I guess it was about September, Stanton Friedman was giving a speech at Pima Community College here in Tucson on UFOs. And just out of curiosity, I went to Stanton Friedman's speech. And during the course of his speech, Stanton said that there was no such thing as Blue Book Report 13. And after he delivered his speech, I approached him and I said, that's not true. There is a Blue Book 13. I've read it. I've seen it. And with a matter of minutes, Stanton Friedman, Alan Benz, and Jim Lorenzen, who was the head of APRO at the time, and I were on our way over to the APRO offices, where I spent about 3 to 4 hours talking to them while they were recording everything. And I had recorded some cassettes for Wendell also, trying to recall more detail of what I'd seen.
Hang on a second, Bill. You just crossed the line. You should have known if you went to one of these seminars, there would have been an undercover government agent there. I'm willing to bet my life on it, especially back in those days. Especially. You were baited, set up, and got bagged. I don't know what's going to happen next to this guy, but this may be the end of the interview. I'm just saying, after hearing them say this, I can understand why he had multiple attempts on his life. What do you think? Tell me in the comments below. We would all like to know. Let's keep it going, Bill.
I reported to work like I normally do. I dropped the wife off at school and the kids off at the daycare center. I signed into my workstation and was immediately informed that the base commander wanted to see me. And I was escorted to the base commander's office by 2 air security police officers. So I got up to his office and was promptly informed that I was to wait. And I waited about 30 to 40 minutes, and he finally called me into his office and told me that my services for Air Security Services Command were no longer needed, that I was being returned to the United States. To which I promptly replied, well, technically I'm a dependent husband. Just debrief me, give me my final paycheck, and I'll go home. To which he replied, you are being sent back to the United States. And I said, well, at least let me call my wife down at the school and tell her what's going on. And he said, you are being held incommunicado. You will be immediately taken to RAF Lakenheath and put on a flight back to the United States. Which is what happened. I was put on a flight. They drove me to RAF Lakenheath, and I was put on a MAC flight, handed my final paycheck right then and there, and flown in to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and cut loose. So the first thing I did was try to contact my wife on the telephone. When I tried to contact her, I dialed our home phone number in England, and it rang, and then a man's voice answered the phone. Hello, who is this? Well, this is Bill. Is Stephanie there? Click. Hang up. Then I tried to call some of my friends. I dialed their numbers. The phone would ring. A man's voice would answer it. Hello. Click. Hang up on me. And at this point, I was becoming an emotional basket case. I really was. I mean, I was an emotional wreck at that point. You know, all kinds of things go through your head at that point, and UFOs were the furthest thing from my mind. And one of the things was that I thought that my wife was having an affair with somebody who wanted to get me out of there, and who decided that they were just going to fire me and boot me out. And that was a reasonable explanation at the time. I didn't know what else to think, because I certainly wasn't thinking about UFOs or the job that I was doing. I wasn't told that the job I did was poor or anything. In fact, I had received several commendations for the work that I did. And eventually, as things got progressively worse, I gave up trying to contact my wife. And I haven't seen my wife or kids in 15 years.
Ouch. This is a massive ramification. He was stripped of all of his rank, everything, and thrown to the dogs. I mean, he's already lost his family. He has no contact with them. This is crazy. He crossed the line. Being an initial whistleblower, we can see what happened. This man's life was stripped from him, silently, unbeknownst to him. He probably didn't even know what was going on. At this point, he's probably just trying to get by day to day. This is ridiculous. I couldn't even imagine. You put yourself in a weird situation, though. I don't feel so bad for him, but I do say thank you for blowing the whistle. And we are always looking for Project Blue Book. What really is going on? This is the original beginning of this process, which has opened the door for all of us to be here today. William English is the godfather of blowing that whistle. Thank you for doing so. But you can see that the payoff may have not been worth it. I'm starting to feel like this guy's life did not end with rainbows and lollipops. Let's keep it moving and hear what he has to say next.
In the course of the last year, we've discovered that there are other areas within ufology that need to be delved into more than they have in the past. A good example is paranormal activity and its relationship to abductees and contactees. Now, for a period of time in the past, we looked upon abductees and contactees as being screwballs. Any serious research or investigation in this area was sort of frowned upon because we had no real way of proving that it happened. That's since changed. We've been able to establish that these things do indeed happen. There is some physical evidence that we've been able to see.
We've established that something happened.
Yeah.
Whether it is as
an abduction or contact, we don't know for sure. I mean, we have no real way of definitely saying, short of trotting out the alien themselves or filming them abducting someone. But here we get into a shadowy area, and that involves paranormal activity. most contactees, people who've not had contact with each other, tell usually the same story in various different forms of either dreaming about being carried aboard an alien spacecraft, having medical tests performed on them. And it wasn't until Betty and Barney Hill came out, and their case was so well documented and researched by medical authorities and psychological authorities, that the tide suddenly began to shift in favor of acceptance of the abduction contactee scenario. And since then, more and more evidence has come out which supports the possibility that this has happened. But there is an area which has been totally ignored, and that is paranormal phenomena. I'm talking about things like poltergeist activity, precognition, balls of light floating through the room, books flying through the air, psychokinetic incidences, and this kind of thing. And surprisingly enough, recently, in performing research and going through old records of Dr. Leo Sprinkle, talking to people from all over the country, information that was gained from Paranet, we've discovered that there is a correlation of paranormal activity that goes back as far as 1963 with regards to the dividing line between UFOs and psychic phenomena, because the research that I've done indicates that it's possible that they're interconnected.
The proof is out there. And together, we just rewound this clock 40 years. We just got a little snippet deeper down the rabbit hole, looking and finding the truth. You can see for yourself that this is the beginning of blowing whistles. I want to find this trail of whistleblowers and investigate them until I find the truth. What we just witnessed today was a very compelling story and what I feel was truthful. We're witnessing a man who had an opportunity to have somewhat of a prestigious military career, but instead turned his back on what he signed an oath over to expose the truth. These are the exact reasons why I will continue to scour the internet, speculate, and search down rabbit holes, looking for the truth. And I will find the truth. I'm your boy Bear Jags. Thanks for following along with my journey. And remember to hit the like and subscribe button for more exciting content just like this. And until the next one, peace out.